To Each a Tempo, an Ace Attorney and Olympiad Agents fanfiction, Chapter 8. For all their brainstorming, Phoenix and his team couldn't do more than watch the clock hands shave the recess away to nothing. Foxx said it, and Mia agreed. They would have to wait and see who Tucker was, and what he did. Court filed back into place. Phoenix spread his evidence again over the defense stand and tried not to notice that Edgeworth wasn't looking at him. The judge brought silence with a strike of his gavel and looked to Edgeworth.
The court will now reconvene for the trial of Mr. Stewart Lowe. Has the prosecution found Mr. Tucker, the witness?
We have. In Foster Park, as Mr. Vanderspiegle testified. He's being prepared by police as we speak. He's a rather unusual personality. It remains to be seen whether he has any merit as an eyewitness, Your Honor.
Rubbing at his beard, the judge nodded.
All right, the court will take note of that.
Undermining the witness's testimony already.
She stared laser intense across the court. Sometimes Phoenix wondered if she would rather lead the charge herself.
He's not sure of his footing either.
And Phoenix resented it suddenly. How could a testimony be useful when Edgeworth had already discredited it? How was that trusting each other? Tucker entered the court between two bailiffs, a shambling brown and navy mess of clothes. He lurched on his feet just as Vanderspiegle said. He peered over the witness stand with nervous rodent's eyes, tugging his sleeves to cover his knuckles.
Witness, please state your name and occupation for the court.
Tucker's gaze darted, like he was watching Edgeworth's voice echo around the ceiling. Then he squinted toward the prosecution, tugging his mustard-colored cap tighter on his head.
Oh, you mean me?
Yes, witness.
To be fair, Edgeworth seemed very nearly patient, arms folded and one finger tapping slow. The witness tucked his faded shirt tails tighter into his pants.
I didn't do nothing.
Quiet dragged out. Tucker had no more to say, and moved on to fussing with one of his sweaters. At least it was obvious how he got his makeshift name.
That is the only statement the witness has seen fit to give police so far, regardless of the question he has asked.
Would the defense like to attempt a cross-examination?
Edgeworth wasn't being difficult then. The witness denying everything really didn't make for a very helpful testimony. But they had no choice. They had no other leads, and Phoenix had to try. Recalling an old boat shop owner, and how canny someone apparently senile could be, Phoenix nodded.
Yes, Your Honor.
Then, rubbing his chin, Phoenix considered Tucker. The gallery above seemed to have captured his attention. His fidgeting slowed to pulling at his shirt sleeves.
Mr. Tucker, may I call you that?
They call me that.
Well, it was a step in the right direction.
Were you in Foster Park yesterday morning?
I didn't do nothing.
The sleeve pulling quickened, and his bushy brows drew, annoyed. They seemed to have taken a step back just as easily. Phoenix rubbed his neck and looked to Mia, who stood statuesque with concentration.
What now?
I'm sorry, Phoenix. I've tapped every database I can think of.
I think he knows something. Maybe we just need to jog his memory.
Jogging the witness's memory, at the very least, might cause a reaction in Tucker, something to make his cover slip, if his behavior was a cover at all. Phoenix considered his phrasing, shuffled his words, and tried again.
So, Foster Park is nice this time of year, isn't it?
He grinned hopeful. Who didn't like small talk about the weather? Edgeworth's withering look was his answer. Tucker, at least, muttered a positive.
The park. I like the park.
That's it. Approach it from another angle.
Do you spend a lot of your time in the park, Mr. Tucker?
Tucker muttered again, pulling at his collar. His shirt sleeve fell, the wrist underneath was chalk pale, and he yanked the sleeve immediately back up.
You're not a cop, are you?
If this was a cover, it was a good one.
No, I'm not a cop.
Nodding, Tucker returned to idly pulling his sleeves.
I like the park.
Another agonizing stretch of quiet, and Phoenix looked to the rest of the court. Edgeworth stood pensive. Maybe he would indulge the defense's methods, but the judge was starting to stare. Phoenix would be accused of wasting the court's time at this rate. He had to pick up the pace, but how? He would have to make the direct approach work.
Mr. Tucker! Did you see a lady in a white sweater yesterday morning?
This was too fast. He knew it was. The instant fright spread over Tucker's face.
I didn't do nothing. I didn't.
I know you didn't. We just need to know what happened.
It's all right.
He expected Mia's voice, but not with such soft power, not meant to carry across the court. Phoenix looked to her and saw her encouraging smile, the one that greased wheels.
You can tell us, Mr. Tucker. It would help the lady if you did.
Tucker watched Mia, or maybe Maya, since there was no way to know what his darting eyes found. He finally looked away, around at the court and back to Phoenix.
I didn't do nothing to her. Honest.
This was the thread to pull, which was all Phoenix ever needed. He smiled inside.
She was a nice lady, wasn't she?
But he hadn't expected the hunted mouse terror in Tucker's eyes, the reflexive yank at his sleeves. Why would mentioning an elderly lady, an unfortunate victim, do that?
I didn't do nothing.
Maybe he didn't. If the killer was someone else, someone the victim didn't see because they approached from behind, this Tucker might not have laid a hand on her.
But what could he have to hide then? Vanderspiegel's testimony placed Tucker fleeing the scene moments before the time of death, and Agent J helped the victim fend off a threatening figure sometime in those last moments. This was where Mia's strategies paid off. Phoenix made origami folds of logic. He wondered not how to prove that Tucker encountered Morna Beasley, but what came about because of the encounter.
All right, maybe she was a mean lady, but did you try to talk to her, Mr. Tucker?
Pant smoothing and sleeve yanking was his only answer for a moment. There had to be some key hidden in Tucker's sleeves. They were a focus point in his fidgeting, a magnetic draw.
Don't have no friends. Never. I just say hello to people sometimes. I didn't do nothing. I didn't.
Mr. Wright.
The judge's stern voice dragged Phoenix's attention up and away from those shirt sleeves.
Unless there is a point to this line of questioning, I will not waste more of this court's time. Can you prove that Mr. Tucker met the victim?
Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he was sleeping on nothing more solid than faith, but a hunch-stirred determination in Phoenix. Morna fought off an attacker, and Tucker had something literally up his sleeve.
I can, Your Honor. Please, just a little more of the court's patience.
Still no comment from Edgeworth, just folded arms and a critical stare boring holes in Phoenix. The judge stared dire himself, turning the gavel between his fingers.
Make it quick then, Mr. Wright.
Phoenix looked to his paper-covered stand, combing quick through the rows of text and the diagrams. Something had to help him. Something might trigger Tucker, but most of the notes were confidential and useless.
Phoenix, maybe if Tucker sees her again.
Morna's calm gaze, and the picture clipped to her autopsy report. It would be like a hot brand on a guilty conscience. Phoenix nodded to Mia and waved a bailiff over.
If the witness would look at this report.
Phoenix looked to Tucker. He shook now, eyes darting, his clothing pulling speeding up.
Mr. Tucker, I think you did meet the lady, and you did do something to her.
No.
The bailiff came to his side and placed the autopsy report in front of him. Tucker glanced to it and recoiled, burnt. Here was Phoenix's chance, a crack to force wider.
Mr. Tucker, if you didn't hurt Morna Beasley, then tell us what happened.
Tucker's hands curled close to his chest.
No, I didn't.
That picture stared him down, Morna accusing silent until Tucker reached for the report, recoiled again and sobbed, hands flying to his face.
I just wanted to say hello. I didn't do nothing to the lady, nothing. Well, she's not a nice lady, and she didn't have to do that. I didn't do nothing.
His sleeve sagged, and two huge purple blotches showed stark on his forearms. Tucker bore bruises of self-defense. It took long moments for Tucker to be led from the courtroom, still sobbing denials. Confessions could hurt, but, Phoenix reminded the growing ache inside of him, they were necessary. Absolutely necessary.
The victim's fear, and Jay's helping her. It was all a misunderstanding. She must have felt safer with our music power assistance, though.
Phoenix glanced to the defendant's box and saw Stewart's twitch of a nod, his eyes casting to the floor. Sometimes there was no time for the full story, and no time for doubts. There was only the blazing need to help. He glanced to Mia, too. She folded her arms tighter and had nothing to say. The judge's gavel hammered a demanding beat, and the court fell quiet once more.
Well, That was quite a development. Will the defense care to make a statement?
The story made more sense now. Phoenix nodded.
As the court saw, Mr. Tucker's forearms are bruised as though he lifted his arms to protect himself. Maybe he tried to speak with the victim, and she struck him out of fear.
The truth straightened his posture, strengthened his voice.
And that contradicts evidence. Morna Beasley was killed with a single blow from behind, meaning that she never saw her attacker. Not to mention that the killer's footprints led through the forest, not out onto the path where Mr. Vanderspiegle could have witnessed someone fleeing the scene.
Objection!
Phoenix had nearly forgotten about Edgeworth, stoic as he was. But that smirk and headshake were all too familiar.
So, what you've gone to great pains to prove, Mr. Wright, is that Mr. Tucker did not kill the victim, but someone else did. Let me remind you that there was only one other suspect known to be near the scene of the crime who could have ambushed Miss Beasley and fled unseen by Mr. Vanderspiegle. That person is your own client.
A trap. A trap, and this one wasn't even Edgeworth's doing. Phoenix had walked into it all on his own. But he needed the truth. But not all of the truth could help him here.
Objection! Mr. Lowe has stated that he's never seen the victim before. Do you have any evidence suggesting otherwise, Mr. Edgeworth?
Phoenix.
But he barely heard Fox's voice. There was only the two of them. Edgeworth readily locking gazes with Phoenix, but there was no smugness, no shock. Edgeworth's face was cool with consideration. Phoenix balled fists. Where did teamwork end and legal responsibility begin? Just what had he asked Edgeworth for when he asked for trust?
I have no such evidence.
Edgeworth looked to the rest of the court, breaking their electric tie.
At this time, the prosecution requests another day to fully investigate this case.
There are indeed questions to be answered here. Then, court is adjourned. I expect to see decisive evidence tomorrow.
The gavel fell. They had survived the first day. Phoenix let out a relief-heavy sigh as they left the courtroom's heavy doors.
I guess that could have been worse.
Yeah, nothing's so bad if you know you're gonna have to wing it. That, and having good backup.
So, how did it go, Nick?
He hadn't noticed Mia slipping away, the fading of that otherworldly tingle. He just saw the return of Maya's vivid energy and eyes full of questions.
I'll tell you the whole story later, but we've got some of that morning's events figured out anyway. And Mr. Lowe did fine.
To be honest, it wasn't that hard. I just hated not telling the truth to you guys, I guess.
He noticed the bailiffs approaching and grumbled, face twisting annoyed.
Guess we'll have to talk later. You too, Foxy.
Take care, Jay.
Maybe Foxx had more to say, but she just typed instead, triggering whatever the agent's network did while one of their own was under police watch. Stewart nodded his goodbye and, between two guards, left. Their circle was suddenly missing a piece. Maya looked to Phoenix, smiling hopefully. She held a piece of paper with Mia's handwriting on it.
Mia said to tell you good work, and she wishes she could have that kind of network.
If Mia had been working with savvy agents and plentiful resources, well, the world would be a different place, that was for sure. A better place.
Hey, who's that guy?
Mr. Wright, sir.
He should have known Vanderspiegle would stay after the trial to meet people and talk their ears off. Phoenix accepted Vanderspiegle's firm handshake and tried to match his beaming smile.
I do hope I'm not interrupting, but I simply had to offer a proper greeting, you understand. Ah, and I don't believe we've been introduced, Miss...
Maya blinked.
Oh, me?
She brightened and offered her slim hand, which was immediately swallowed up by Vanderspiegel's white-gloved one.
I'm Maya Fey.
Fey, would you be any relation to a Miss Crystal Fey? It's such a distinctive surname. Why,
Phoenix,
I know
we're going to need
things and things
Vanderspiegel's
from
help for our
generations
cover.
and generations.
This is nothing the agency can't smooth over, but just make sure he's got a favorable impression of you and Jay. Alright?
He had nearly forgotten about that. Stewart had a cover story in the extravagant staff registry. Cover that Vanderspiegel could make or break.
And
Phoenix chewed his lip.
No, she's my second cousin anyway. Or maybe a third cousin? I forget. It's been so long since I saw Crystal.
Wondering how long Maya and Vanderspiegel could happily chatter away, and deciding that saints didn't have that kind of patience, Phoenix pressed in.
Yes, Mr. Wright.
And as he remembered something, possibly his point, Vanderspiegel deflated. His purple-clad shoulders fell and smile lines creased regretful.
I must apologize. Truly. If I had paid closer attention to my business's records, I may have been of more assistance during today's proceedings. I do hope Mr. Lowe wasn't, shall we say, slandered in any way because of my oversight?
Being tried for murder was pretty slanderous by itself, actually.
Well,
An agent will contact him soon, Phoenix. Set him up.
that makes sense if you don't do it on your own. Computer things.
Phoenix pushed on through Foxx's presence. Once his thoughts were a single train again, he considered how to cast himself and Stewart in a favorable light. Some excuse a business owner would understand.
Actually, Mr. Vanderspiegle, the way Mr. Lowe joined your catering service, wasn't as simple as your bookkeeper making a mistake. It just involved some confidential records that we'd rather not be made public. If it can be helped at all, would it be alright if a colleague of mine got in touch with you to clear things up?
Oh, yes, of course, Mr. Wright. Business can be a terribly delicate venture. I am familiar with that. Here you are.
With a practiced flip of his wrist, he produced a business card.
And I am available for any catering functions you may need as well, Mr. Wright, Miss Fay. Extravagant specialty is weddings, but we provide extraordinary service for any sort of function you may need. Birthdays, anniversaries, reunions,
Vanderspiegle's card flashed dazzling as Phoenix held it. Was that much gold leaf really necessary?
Socials, box socials, bar mitzvahs, award ceremonies. We've catered business lunches on premises, and I once organized a soiree for a lady who had no occasion at all. She simply wanted to hold a party.
Catering?
Maya brightened and looked to Phoenix.
We should order sometime, Nick. Maybe have a nice lunch in the office.
Good thing he was used to those bank account destroying puppy eyes.
We'll consider it. Thank you.
Phoenix even managed not to wince.
But we really do need to go. The case.
Of course. Yes. I understand, Mr. Wright. I'll be on my way then. Best of luck to you and your client.
With Vanderspiegel gone in a flutter of coattails, the defendant's lobby was mumbling quiet and plain. Phoenix started toward the front doors, Maya close at his side.
Foxx?
Good, Phoenix. Star will be there shortly to intercept him. If he's willing to work with an agency that doesn't exist, we'll have a solid alibi for Jay before court resumes tomorrow.
And unless Vanderspiegel was that friendly toward all murder suspects, the chances seemed good. Relief warmed Phoenix. He nodded. All they needed now was a location, a clue, some starting point to investigate. The day had just begun. Edgeworth had been asked for many things in his prosecuting career: aid and cooperation and silence. This development was much more dangerous. He had never been asked for his trust before, explicitly asked. But hadn't he asked the very same of Wright not long ago? He laid his elbows on his desk, rested his chin against laced hands, and considered the evidence before him. It was a wireless karaoke microphone, black plastic that caught the midday sun along its curves. Innocuous enough inside its plastic evidence bag, airtight and neatly labeled. Except that this recreational object was literally covered with the fingerprints of one Stewart Julian Lowe, and it was constructed solidly enough to strike a killing blow with. The only other evidence the defendant had in his favor was footprints in shifting sand. There was nothing of note in his background check. The past 4 years of his life were empty enough to echo. Lowe had information well hidden, and more importantly, he had Phoenix Wright convinced enough to lie. Edgeworth had always imagined that would require the sky to fall. He had always hoped it possible to be truly just. Life didn't limit itself to black and white. Evidence could hide the real story, and people could hide their stories too. Wright was as human as anyone. Perhaps this was how Sky felt when she looked at withheld evidence and was looked into in return. This wasn't the same. The microphone could do Edgeworth himself no harm. It could only riddle Wright's story with shrapnel and upset everything the two of them knew. There was a time and a place for this evidence. Edgeworth just didn't know when, and he couldn't risk using it, but he had a duty. He had a duty to bring evidence forward. He wasn't really the demon. He couldn't be. He raked a hand into his bangs and left it there. The office stood grave around him. The microphone stared. And minutes slid away, wasted. Edgeworth would achieve nothing at this rate. He stood from his chair and jabbed the most worn autodial button on his telephone. Each ringtone spread tinny from the speaker and died in the office's expanse.
Gumshoe here.
Edgeworth gazed out the window, seeing nothing.
Detective.
Oh, Mr. Edgeworth.
A rustling in the background, doubtless some kind of clumsy fumbling.
What can I do for you, sir?
I need a more specific analysis of the fingerprints on the Lowe microphone.
A baffled pause and a shuffling of papers.
Really, Mr. Edgeworth? The lab had a hard time.
I know.
There were simply too many fingerprints smudged together. They were challenging enough to identify as Lowe's in the first place. Edgeworth rubbed his forehead slow.
I'm authorizing any measures necessary. I need to know what kind of grip this object was held in, Detective.
Yes, sir. I'll be right there.
The line clicked. Edgeworth ended the call with a button's press and turned back to the window. He was reading too much into intangible details, and Wright was probably scrabbling about the crime scene for crumbs. Where were they going without ever knowing the way? Knowing Lowe's grip on the microphone could help. It could determine whether this was the weapon that ended Morna Beasley's life. There was still paperwork to be done for Mr. Tucker's placement in social assistance, and more witnesses crawled from the woodwork. Always. A brassy voice leaped forward in Edgeworth's mind, and he allowed himself a grimace, while he turned to a neat-edged stack of documents. His work was never done.
To Each a Tempo was written by Pyrasaur. Ace Attorney and Elite Beat Agents are owned by Capcom and Enis, respectively. The narrator for this story is Genndy C.O.G. The voice of Phoenix Wright is Lastni. The voice of Maya Fey is Miki. The voice of Miles Edgeworth is Lazy Ace Dia. The voice of Mia Fey is Maxi. The voice of Dick Gumshoe is Genndy C.O.G. The voice of the judge is also Genndy C.O.G. The voice of Agent J is, yet again, Genndy C.O.G. The voice of Agent Foxx is Galen Skibyak. The voice of Cecilius T. Vanderspiegle is Pcasao. The voice of Tucker is Ronson Harrington. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.